Pablo Escobar. He was the head of the Medellin cartel and one of the most powerful drug traffickers in history. He ran a global cocaine operation that stretched from South America to nearly every major market, flooding the world with narcotics and turning himself into one of the richest criminals ever recorded. At the peak of his empire, his net worth hit around $30 billion. In today's money, that would be about $80 billion. The cartel was pulling in over $420 million every single week in the mid-1980s. That added up to more than $22 billion a year. Escobar's network controlled close to 80% of the global cocaine market, and they moved around 15 tons a day. His wealth showed up in the most ridiculous ways. He owned massive estates with helipads, tennis courts, secret compartments, and walls stuffed with cash. He had a custom-built prison with a bar, a soccer field, and his own private guards. He lost around $500 million a year to rats, mold, and misplacement, and still stayed absurdly wealthy. Between 1987 and 1993, he appeared on the billionaire list every year, ranking as high as 7th richest person on the planet. Stade Bonnet. He was a wealthy plantation owner from Barbados who had everything: land, status, and a steady role as a justice of the peace. He inherited a 400-acre sugar estate in Bridgetown and even served as a militia major. Then one day, for reasons still debated, he just snapped and decided piracy sounded like a better use of time. In the spring of 1717, Bonnet borrowed what would be about $400,000 today, bought a sloop called the Revenge, loaded it with 10 cannons, and hired 70 men. He had zero sailing experience, so he did what any confused gentleman turned pirate might do. He paid his crew wages instead of promising treasure. They mostly captured merchant ships hauling boring cargo like wine and cloth, which didn't exactly pile up the riches. Bonnet did join forces with Blackbeard for a while, but eventually took back command of his ship, renaming it Royal James. His pirating career ended after the Battle of Cape Fear River, and he was hanged in Charleston that December. His estimated pirate loot sits at around $6.4 million today, while Forbes placed his gains closer to $4.5 million. Still, he started rich and died infamous. Mahafarid Amir Khosravi. He was an Iranian businessman who rose from Rudbur to run a sprawling empire of over 35 companies. His holdings stretched across steel, bottled water, meat imports, even sports clubs. At one point, he was considered the richest man in Iran, with a personal net worth above $1 billion. Between 2007 and 2011, Khosravi orchestrated a massive fraud scheme worth around $2.6 billion. He used forged letters of credit and bribed bank officials to siphon off public money from state-owned banks. That money went straight into acquisitions, including the major steel company in Khuzestan, and none of it was ever paid back. He didn't hide in the shadows either. His name floated just under Forbes rankings, unofficially sitting at number 290 in April 2012. His scam remains the biggest financial fraud in Iran since the revolution in 1979. Authorities caught up with him fast. He was convicted in 2012 for embezzlement, bribery, and money laundering. Sentenced to death that July, he was executed in Tehran's Evin prison in May 2014. His wife only learned of it after it happened. The scandal rocked Iran's banking system to its core. Feel free to smash that like and subscribe button for more content like this. Anyways, Carlo Gambino. Born in Sicily and raised in the shadows of organized crime, he eventually took the reins of the Gambino family in New York, one of the infamous Five families. By the late 1950s, he was running the entire Mafia Commission and kept that grip until the day he died in 1976. He oversaw a vast criminal empire that handled everything from racketeering and extortion to gambling, drug trafficking, and fraud. His crew had their hands in construction, unions, and anything else that could be squeezed for profit. Under his rule, the family pulled in about $500 million every single year during the peak of the 1960s. By the time he died, Gambino's personal fortune was around $70 million. Today, that would be about $400 million. Unlike many of his peers, he managed to die peacefully, at home, without ever seeing a prison cell. His estate reflected decades of underground income, laundered, hidden, and invested. Most sources agree that his wealth was the result of a half-century climb through the mafia's ranks, avoiding high-profile violence while building one of the richest organized crime legacies the United States has ever seen. Amado Carrillo Fuentes. He was the powerful Mexican drug trafficker who took over the Juarez cartel in the early 1990s. After arranging the assassination of his own boss, he didn't waste time turning the group into one of the most dominant smuggling operations on the planet. Carrillo earned the nickname the Lord of the Skies because he used a whole fleet of aircraft, including Boeing 727s, to fly tons of cocaine from Colombia through Mexico and into the United States. This wasn't some back alley hustle. According to agency reports, the Juarez cartel under Carrillo brought in between $200 and $300 million every single week. At the time of his death in 1997, Carrillo's fortune was estimated around $25 billion. Adjusted for today, that'd land somewhere near $40 billion. That placed him right behind Pablo Escobar on the list of richest criminals in history. He was one of the few traffickers who used military-level logistics to keep his empire running. The scale of his operation made him nearly untouchable until the end, and even his death, during a failed surgery, left behind enough money to make most countries jealous. Leona Helmsley. She was a real estate mogul and hotel queen who ran a luxury empire with properties scattered across Manhattan, Florida, and just about every square inch of high-end real estate she could get her hands on. She married Harry Helmsley in 1972 and eventually took the reins of their hospitality empire, including icons like the Empire State Building and over 20 luxury hotels. She wasn't just rich, she was courtroom rich. In 1989, she was convicted for tax evasion, mail fraud, conspiracy, and filing false returns. One of the highlights? Trying to write off an $8 million mansion remodel as a business expense. She got 16 years, but served less than 2, walking free in early 1994. After Harry died in 1997, she inherited his estimated $1.7 billion fortune. By the time she died in 2007, her own wealth had grown to somewhere between $5 and $8 billion. Most of it went to a charitable trust, but she famously left $12 million to her dog, Trouble. That was trimmed to $2 million later, but still, $2 million for a dog that never paid taxes or renovated a mansion. Fabio Ochoa Vasquez. He was the youngest of the 3 Ochoa brothers and one of the founding figures of the Medellin cartel, working closely with Pablo Escobar. While Escobar got the spotlight, Fabio ran major distribution hubs in Miami during the late 1970s and early 80s, quietly pushing massive amounts of cocaine into the United States. He played a major role in shipping and logistics, moving thousands of pounds of product and keeping the U.S. side of the operation running. He was linked to the 1986 murder of Barry Seal, a government informant, though never convicted for it. Fabio and his brothers turned themselves into Colombian authorities in 1991 under plea deals that helped them avoid extradition for a full decade. In 2001, the U.S. finally got him. He was convicted in 2003 and sentenced to 30 years, serving 25 before getting released in December 2024. Back in the late 1980s, Forbes listed the Ochoa brothers as billionaires, with a combined net worth of around $6 billion. Fabio's personal share likely hovered in the 10-figure range. Prosecutors said even after prison, he wouldn't exactly be hurting for money. Edward Blackbeard Teach. He was an English pirate who roamed the West Indies and the American coastline in the early 18th century. Known for setting fuses in his beard to create a smoke-wreathed horror show, he relied on fear and flair more than constant bloodshed. He captained Queen Anne's Revenge, a warship loaded with 40 cannons and a crew of around 300. In 1718, Blackbeard blockaded Charleston and forced the city to hand over medical supplies. Not gold, not jewels, just medicine. His whole career barely lasted 2 years, ending when Royal Navy Lieutenant Robert Maynard caught up with him near Ocracoke Island. That final battle left Blackbeard dead, reportedly with 5 gunshots and 20 sword wounds. Modern historians estimate his total loot at about $12.5 million today, with some guessing up to $14.8 million. Myths toss around wild numbers in the hundreds of millions, but nothing backs that up. The only confirmed recovery after his death was just over 2,000 pounds, which would have been a few $1,000s at the time. So, while his name grew into legend, his actual fortune stayed somewhere between reasonable and lost forever. Jeffrey Pecauer. He was an American investor and philanthropist who quietly became the biggest financial winner from Bernie Madoff's massive Ponzi scheme. Through the Jeffrey M. and Barbara Pecauer Foundation, he invested around $1 billion with Madoff's firm, but what he got back was far more than that. Between 1995 and 2008, Pecauer withdrew about $5.1 billion more than he put in. That made him richer from the scam than Madoff himself. In 2009, after the scheme collapsed, the court-appointed trustee sued Pecauer's estate, demanding $7.2 billion in fraudulent gains. That full amount was eventually returned by his widow, setting the record for the largest forfeiture in the country's judicial history. At the time of his death in 2009, Forbes listed his net worth at $1 billion, but even they admitted that number was likely far below the real total. His true wealth was inflated by years of steady withdrawals from a scheme that ruined thousands of others. Despite avoiding criminal conviction, Pecauer's role left a massive financial footprint and a legal legacy that dwarfed anything else from the Madoff fallout. Matteo Messina Denaro. He was a longtime boss in the Sicilian Mafia and spent 30 years as one of the most wanted fugitives in Italy. Known as the successor to Salvatore Riina, he led operations across Trapani province and managed a wide criminal portfolio from the shadows until his arrest in January 2023. Dennaro's empire stretched beyond old-school mafia hits. He oversaw extortion schemes, drug trafficking involving heroin and cocaine, and a web of laundering through supermarkets, wind farms, villas, and even olive groves. His operation didn't just survive, it grew. Authorities seized about 700 million euros in 2008, another 1.5 billion in 2010, and the same again in 2018. By the time they caught him, investigators estimated he controlled around 4 billion euros in assets. That's roughly $3.5 to $4 billion depending on the exchange rate, and nearly all of it tied to both illegal rackets and legitimate industries. His fortune placed him at the top tier of global organized crime, with one of the largest criminal estates ever linked to the Cosa Nostra. Even with years of seizures, much of his wealth likely remains unaccounted for. Samuel Black Sam Bellamy. He was an English pirate captain from Devon who managed to become one of the richest pirates in history, all in about a year. Nicknamed the Prince of Pirates, Bellamy was known for his fair leadership style and for running his crew more like a democratic council than a dictatorship. His career lasted from 1716 until his death in April 1717, but in that short span, he captured at least 53 ships. His most famous conquest was the Whydah Galley, a fully rigged 300-ton slave ship loaded with gold, ivory, and other valuable goods. After seizing it, he made it his flagship. The Whydah didn't stay in his hands long. It sank in a violent storm off Cape Cod, taking Bellamy and nearly all his crew with it. Only 2 men survived. Despite the short run, historians estimate his total plunder at around $120 to $130 million in today's terms. That places him at the very top of pirate fortunes ever recorded. His combination of success, speed, and myth made him legendary. He built one of the most valuable pirate hulls in history and then lost it all to the sea in a single night. Meyer Lansky. He was the brain behind the American Mafia's financial empire, known as the mob's accountant. Born in 1902, Lansky helped create the National Crime Syndicate and played a major role in shaping modern organized crime alongside Lucky, Luciano, and Bugsy Siegel. His fingerprints were all over everything from casino empires to global money laundering schemes. Starting in the early 1930s, Lansky built an international gambling network with operations in Las Vegas, Miami, New Orleans, Cuba, and even parts of Europe. He used Swiss banks to move money discreetly, laying the groundwork for offshore laundering before most people even knew what it was. He backed Siegel's Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas and turned illicit profits into legitimate casino revenue. By the time he died in 1983, Lansky's net worth was estimated at around $600 million. Some federal sources believed he had another $300 to $400 million tucked away overseas, though nothing was ever officially recovered. Publicly, his US accounts held under $35,000. Despite that low number, there's no doubt he managed and moved hundreds of millions for the syndicate. He made himself rich by making the entire mob richer. Frank Abagnale. He was a teenage con artist who made headlines for posing as a pilot, doctor, and lawyer, before he even turned 21. During the mid-1960s, he forged and passed bad checks across multiple states and countries, building a reputation that would later become Hollywood legend. Between the ages of 16 and 21, Abagnale claimed he cashed up to $10 million in fraudulent checks, but official records suggest the real number was closer to $2.5 million. Even that amount, though, made him one of the most successful forgers of his era, especially considering he pulled it off without digital tools, just paper, charm, and a willingness to lie his way into anything. He was eventually caught and served time in France, Sweden, and the United States. After prison, he flipped the script and built a career as a consultant. He founded Abagnale and Associates and worked with law enforcement agencies, including the FBI, to help stop the same kinds of scams he once perfected. His current net worth is estimated around $10 million, not from crime, but from decades of speaking engagements and security consulting gigs. The story got polished, but the money still stacked up. Dawood Ibrahim. He's the founder of D Company, a massive organized crime syndicate that's run extortion, drug trafficking, smuggling, and terrorism since the 1970s. Born in India and now reportedly based in Karachi, he became one of the most powerful underworld figures in Asia and one of the richest criminals alive. By the 1980s, his operation was smuggling around a quarter of India's gold and silver imports. His network stretched across continents, using Hawala banking systems to move money through invisible channels. He was linked to the 1993 Bombay bombings and has been labeled a global terrorist by India and the United States, with a $25 million bounty still hanging over his head. Forbes pegged his net worth at $6.7 billion in 2015, but newer intelligence sources push that figure closer to $8.9 billion today. His assets include hotels, commercial buildings, and real estate spread across at least 16 countries, from the United Kingdom and United Arab Emirates to Turkey and Australia. While many of his holdings have been frozen, investigators believe large portions remain untouched. His empire didn't just span cities, it spanned governments, industries, and international borders. Al Capone. He was the kingpin of Chicago's underworld during Prohibition, taking over the outfit in 1925 and turning it into one of the most profitable criminal enterprises in American history. Bootlegging, gambling, racketeering, extortion, you name it, Capone ran it, and he did it with brutal efficiency. At the height of his power, the outfit pulled in about $105 million a year. $60 million came from illegal alcohol, $25 million from gambling, and $10 million from prostitution. His weekly payroll alone sat around $300,000, funding an army of enforcers, lookouts, and crooked officials. Capone's personal fortune peaked at roughly $100 million, which today would be close to $1.5 billion. But when he died in 1947, only about $7 million was publicly accounted for. Around $100 million in modern terms. The rest was believed to be hidden, stashed in safes, buried in forgotten spots, or simply lost due to the mental decline he suffered in his final years. Stories still float around about missing caches and unclaimed safety deposit boxes. Whatever the case, Capone went from top dog to mystery man, leaving behind a fortune most couldn't even trace. Black Bart Roberts. Born John Roberts in Wales, he became one of the most successful pirates of the Golden Age. Between 1719 and 1722, he captured more than 400 ships, building a ruthless reputation and commanding a fleet that stretched across the Americas and West Africa. Roberts was a strategic mastermind. One of his biggest scores came off the coast of Brazil, where he intercepted a Portuguese treasure fleet and seized a ship loaded with 40,000 gold medors, plus royal jewels. He wasn't just flashy. He ran his crews with discipline, enforcing a strict pirate code and sailing with multiple, heavily armed vessels at once. By the time of his death in 1722, he had racked up loot worth an estimated $32 million today. That haul earned him a place among the top 5 richest pirates in history. After he was killed in battle by the Royal Navy at Cape Lopez, most of his treasure vanished, either scattered with the crew or taken by rival forces. Still, in just 3 years, Roberts pulled off one of the most profitable pirate runs ever documented, leaving behind a legacy built on gold, gunpowder, and sheer efficiency. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. He was the boss of the Sinaloa cartel, a global drug trafficking empire that operated like a corporation with an army. Known for smuggling enormous shipments of cocaine, heroin, meth, and marijuana into the United States, he used everything from planes and tunnels to trucks and bribes. His cartel reached deep into North America, Europe, and even Australia. Under his leadership, the Sinaloa cartel became one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the world. He escaped prison twice, once in 2001 in a laundry cart, and again in 2015 through a mile-long tunnel dug right to his cell. He was captured again in 2016, and by 2019 he was sentenced to life plus 30 years, along with a forfeiture order of over $12.6 billion. Forbes estimated his net worth at $1 billion in 2009, ranking him number 701 on their richest list. Some sources floated figures as high as $14 billion, but those claims aren't backed up by anything concrete. What is known is that El Chapo turned trafficking into a billion-dollar machine and paid for it with the rest of his life. Carlos Lehder. He was a Colombian-German drug trafficker who co-founded the Medellin cartel and engineered one of the most effective smuggling operations of the cocaine era. Known as El Loco, he turned Norman's Cay in the Bahamas into a fortified transit hub where aircraft moved tons of cocaine straight into Florida with terrifying efficiency. Lehder didn't just work for the cartel, he helped design its infrastructure. He coordinated directly with Pablo Escobar and ran his own semi-autonomous network complete with private runways, radar systems, and armed guards. At the peak of his operation, his annual revenue was estimated around $300 million, all generated through high-volume transport and distribution. His personal fortune climbed to about $2.7 billion, landing him among the top drug kingpins of all time. In 1987, he became the first major Medellin figure extradited to the United States, where he was convicted and sentenced to life plus 135 years. That sentence was reduced after he cooperated with authorities, and he was quietly released in 2020, relocated to Germany. Despite decades behind bars, his role in cartel history and his billions remain permanently stamped into the legacy of drug trafficking. Muammar Gaddafi. He ruled Libya for over 40 years after seizing power in a 1969 coup and built one of the most corrupt regimes of the modern era. Under his control, Libya's oil wealth flowed into shadowy networks run by family members, intelligence officials, and a tight circle of elites. Reports show that his regime siphoned off at least $100 billion, with broader investigations estimating the total theft at up to $300 billion. Of that, somewhere between $40 and $200 billion was believed to be controlled directly by Gaddafi's family. These funds were hidden in offshore accounts, gold reserves, shell companies, and luxury real estate, much of it scattered across Europe and Africa. After his death in 2011, international recovery efforts began uncovering pieces of the lost fortune. Italy seized over €1 billion in assets in 2012. South Africa turned up another billion in cash and bullion. Ghana found pallets of gold worth hundreds of millions. Still, most of the stolen wealth has never been traced. Gaddafi didn't just rule Libya. He privatized its economy, funneled it offshore, and left behind a financial mystery that governments are still trying to solve. Bugsy Siegel. He was a flashy, violent, and ambitious mobster who went from contract killings in New York to reshaping Las Vegas with a vision no one in the mob had tried before. Linked with Murder, Inc., the Jewish mob, and close allies like Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano, Siegel was equal parts celebrity gangster and brutal enforcer. In 1946, he took control of the Flamingo Hotel project in Las Vegas, determined to build a luxury casino that would lure high society into the desert. The original budget was around $1 million, but Siegel's spending spiraled to $6 million. The mob didn't love the tab or the slow returns. Despite early setbacks, the Flamingo eventually turned a profit and became the blueprint for organized crime's casino investments. At the time of his death in 1947, his net worth was estimated at about $8 million, around $100 million today. His murder, still unsolved, happened just as Las Vegas was beginning to pay off. Some blame overspending, others suspect skimming, but the result was clear. Siegel died before he could fully cash in on the empire he helped imagine. Ferdinand Marcos. He ruled the Philippines from 1965 until his exile in 1986, using martial law and political control to run one of the most aggressive kleptocracies of the 20th century. While in office, he siphoned off billions through foreign aid skimming, rigged contracts, military kickbacks, and monopolies operated by cronies. The looting wasn't subtle. By the time he was ousted during the People Power Revolution, the government estimated that he had stolen between $5 and $10 billion. Later, economic studies suggested the total haul might actually be closer to $30 billion, once interest, asset growth, and earlier acquisitions were factored in. Much of that wealth was tucked away in overseas accounts. One Swiss deposit alone held about $356 million, later frozen and repatriated. A government task force created after his fall recovered around $5 billion by 2013, but that's still only a fraction of what's missing. His wife Imelda famously stashed cash and luxury goods, turning their overseas holdings into symbols of corruption. Despite court rulings and asset recoveries, the majority of the Marcos fortune remains buried in offshore structures, untraced accounts, or simply lost in a maze of global laundering. Victor Bout. He's the Russian arms dealer once called the Merchant of Death for turning Soviet military leftovers into a global black market gold mine. After leaving the Soviet military as a translator, he built a private air fleet, around 60 planes strong, and moved everything from missiles to assault rifles into war zones across Africa, Asia, and South America. In the 1990s and early 2000s, Bout's network used forged paperwork, shell companies, and fake end-user certificates to get around sanctions. He sold weapons to warlords, militias, and insurgent groups, but somehow still managed to contract work with the UN and US forces for transport, because irony loves company. In March 2008, a sting operation in Bangkok led to his arrest. He was convicted in 2011 for conspiring to supply arms to terrorists and sentenced to 25 years in prison. That didn't last. He was released in December 2022 in a prisoner swap with Russia. Despite rumors of $6 billion in revenue at his peak, most credible sources peg his actual net worth around $50 million. That's still an enormous pile of money built from war, chaos, and a fleet that flew guns into nearly every major conflict on the map. John Gotti. He was the sharp-dressed, camera-loving boss of the Gambino crime family who took control in 1985 after having Paul Castellano gunned down outside a steakhouse. Known as the Teflon Don for dodging convictions throughout the late 80s, Gotti turned mob life into a public spectacle and ruled New York's underworld with gold chains and media flair. During his time as boss, the Gambino family was pulling in around $500 million a year through gambling, extortion, drug trafficking, loan sharking, and labor racketeering. His former underboss, Sammy Gravano, pegged Gotti's personal take at somewhere between $5 and $12 million a year. At his peak, Gotti's net worth was estimated at around $30 million, adjusted for inflation. He used that money to live lavishly. Tailored suits, expensive cars, and a celebrity image that made him a media magnet, but his reign didn't last forever. In 1992, Gravano flipped, testified against him, and Gotti was convicted of murder and racketeering. He was sentenced to life in prison and died there in 2002. His fortune never reached cartel levels, but in terms of visibility, Gotti was the mob's loudest millionaire. Paul Lear Alexander. He's the Brazilian drug trafficker once known as the Crazy Duck and the Baron of Cocaine, and he built an empire that stretched from South America to the United States. His operation was slick, using methods like hiding cocaine in electrical transformers to move product undetected across borders. By the early 1990s, Alexander had amassed a fortune that funded private jets, sprawling ranches, and a yacht reportedly worth $25 million. He was arrested by the DEA in 1993 and sentenced to prison, serving 17 years. Then in 2010, during a conditional release, he simply vanished. His estimated net worth is now pegged at around $870 million, though earlier reports placed it closer to $170 million. Either way, his fortune made him one of the richest traffickers ever to come out of Brazil. The fact that he allegedly worked with agencies like the DEA and Mossad adds another bizarre layer to his story. Disappearing after years in prison only fueled his legend further. He didn't just make money, he made himself disappear, along with nearly $1 billion worth of criminal legacy. Congrats on making it to the end. If you like this video, please show your support by hitting the like and subscribe button.